President, CEO, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here this morning at such a wonderful venue. It's probably I was looking out at the pitch there, it's probably the nearest I'll ever get to playing on that particular pitch, but look, we're here anyway, and I look forward to a proactive engagement with many of your members here this morning and indeed in the time ahead. For many of you that don't know me, as well as what Tom has outlined there, I have actually worked in the construction sector myself for over 20 years, where I initially trained as an apprentice electrician with the ESB and subsequently went on then and worked on many sites around the southeast over that 20 years, but subsequently joined the planning and design department of ESB networks in the southeast, where from 2000 to 2007, literally I was at the coal face looking at the projected increases in construction that we saw during those boom years. And I have to say, the ESB and the connections are always a good indicator of how construction is going. And we were actually scratching our heads at that particular time saying, how can we maintain the levels of growth in construction, the levels of house building? And it did subsequently become a problem, as we all know. So look, that is part of my background. I also served 8 years as a member of Waterford County Council, where again, being very connected to my own community, I saw many of the issues with regard to planning within our communities. Some of the problems included, and I think we do need to address some of those areas as well if we are to have a sustainable construction sector in our society. I think you'll all readily appreciate that housing is very much a priority for government, and as you know, the government's Construction 2020 strategy for a renewed construction strategy was published in May, as just has been said. The strategy was spearheaded by the Taoiseach, who followed up with my appointment as Minister of State for Housing, Planning and Coordination of the Construction 2020 strategy. And I do have a direct role in coordinating specifically the Construction 2020 strategy and the over 70 actions that are contained within that. And that's something that I am determined, even though we have a relatively short time, I believe we cannot waste any time and we need to move as swiftly as possible to deliver on those actions. And that will require ongoing cross-government coordination, which is essential to deliver on all of these actions. Increasing both public and private housing supply is a critical priority and an issue both for people who are looking for houses and also for the economy. And Construction 2020 provides a blueprint for a properly functioning and sustainable construction sector. The Government expects the Construction 2020 strategy to facilitate an uptake in development, resulting in thousands of much-needed new jobs in the construction area. Through its 75 actions, the strategy provides for a strategic approach to returning the construction sector in a sustainable fashion towards the provision of housing based on real and measured demand. It addresses the full range of relevant issues, including the planning process, financing, and access to mortgage finance and the construction workforce. I want to see a situation develop whereby housing supply closely matches our increasing population and changing household formations. I also want to see a properly functioning housing sector that serves its primary purpose of providing affordable housing for families and that plays its part in our economic recovery. But it's not the only and main driver in that economic recovery. Even a cursory look at recent housing completion figures tells its own story. And I know I don't have to spell it out to you, the members of the CIF, in this particular audience, but in recent years there has been little connection between the construction and supply of houses and any measured sustainable level of demand. In 2006, at the peak of the housing bubble, some 93,000 housing units were completed across the country, 19,400 of them in Dublin, and in 2013, just a total of 8,300 homes were completed, with just 1,300 of those in Dublin. These figures reflect how wildly the pendulum has swung since the property crash. We've essentially gone from one extreme to the other. And what I want to see is the market normalising and getting back to a sustainable level of construction that will meet the demand that is required. Government recognises the particular concerns about housing supply in parts of Dublin and the Greater Dublin area. In addition to supply issues, there has also been a reduction in the mobility in the housing market, and that's for a variety of reasons, including negative equity, mortgagees wanting to keep their tracker mortgages, and uncertainty about future developments in the price and financing constraints as well. The number of second-hand houses being placed on the market has fallen significantly. Fewer households than would normally be the case are seeking either to trade up or trade down, constraining mobility in the market. The result has been increased upward pressure on the prices for the limited supply that is available. and the knock-on consequences for rents where demand is outstripping supply is obvious for all to see. The CSO's monthly residential property price index showed an increase of 25.1% across all property types in Dublin in the 12 months to August 2014. The Private Residential Tenancies Board rent index showed an annual growth in rents in the capital of 10.5% to the end of June. I am very conscious of the difficulties caused by rising rents and the problem of sourcing suitable accommodation, especially in Dublin and other larger urban centres. The fundamental reason behind the rise in rents is simply a lack of supply. Under Construction 2020, a housing supply coordination task force for Dublin has been established, involving the 4 Dublin local authorities with an immediate focus on monitoring trends in the supply of viable and market-ready approved developments and acting on those trends where supply is believed to be below what is required. It is working closely with industry and other parties, including those responsible for key infrastructure, to identify and address any obstacles to viable and appropriate development. Having regard to the fact that the primary pent-up demand in the Dublin area is for houses rather than apartments, Construction 2020 advocates the application of certain flexibilities around density requirements to support a kickstart initiative for prime development areas. I would like to make it absolutely clear that this flexibility on densities should not be interpreted as implying a return to the unsustainable low-density practices of the past. As is outlined in Construction 2020, this flexibility is conditional on achieving higher density targets over an entire development area over time. It is also imperative in the overall context of new housing that the quality of urban construction and house design is of the highest standard to ensure the highest sustainable living patterns into the future. Given concern about the level of supply in the Dublin area, the 4 local authorities are working together to identify housing developments that have planning permission in place and that are capable of being delivered in the short to medium term. They are also exploring what steps may be necessary to facilitate those and bring them online. In this work, they are seeking to leverage to maximum advantage existing public infrastructure investment, including transport, which has been put in place in recent years. They have estimated that there are already 2,000 hectares of land zoned for housing in Dublin, with 1,000 hectares of those comprising large blocks of land in both brownfield and greenfield locations, well served by public transport and other essential infrastructure. At conservative estimates, these lands have the potential to deliver upwards of 30,000 units of accommodation in the Dublin region and across the 4 local authority areas. The other 1,000 hectares of zoned residential lands, while currently in more peripheral or infrastructure poor areas, can also make a contribution to supply over time. Housing supply must be channeled through a fit-for-purpose, flexible, effective and proactive community-led planning system. Proper planning is all about building the right development in the right place at the right time. And to ensure that we have a properly functioning and performing planning system that delivers on the objectives of sustainable development, Construction 2020 outlines a number of key actions in the area of planning. These include measures to accelerate the implementation of planning permissions. They also include the development of vacant and underutilised sites for residential purposes in key urban areas, and will also include certain modifications to the operation of the development contribution schemes. Legislation will be brought forward as a priority to implement these Construction 2020 measures. The Government also intends to legislate for the establishment of a new planning regulator in line with the recommendations of the Mahon Tribunal. The planning regulator will have a central role in the oversight of the planning system with a view to ensuring that past mistakes are not repeated again. Also, the Government's forthcoming policy statement on planning will present a concise and clear statement of the purpose of planning, the underlying values, principles and vision within that. Another central plank in the planning reform agenda is the successor to the National Spatial Strategy. At an operational level, a well-functioning planning system needs to be underpinned by a strategic national framework to inform infrastructural investment decisions and guide spatial planning at more detailed regional and local levels. An up-to-date successor national planning framework is also required to guide and facilitate the national economic recovery in the period ahead, and it is my objective that this new strategy will be completed and in place by the end of 2015. It is also one of my key objectives that Ireland has the highest quality planning system possible, which effectively facilitates sustainable development, looking after long-term interests of our economy and of our local communities. An economic uplift should contribute to alleviating a number of factors that have resulted in a lack of activity and mobility in the housing market and the construction sector. Increased consumer confidence and employment levels, coupled with greater access to credit, would assist to shift the build-up of unsold and vacant properties. Government will also continue to work to resolve legacy issues from the construction boom era, including ghost estates, pyrite problems and substandard developments such as Priory Hall. Construction 2020 also seeks to address capacity issues in the sector, which has been decimated by the economic collapse. My own department, together with the Housing Agency, will be involved in the delivery of over 30 actions in Construction 2020. I have already mentioned some of the key actions that have now been completed or are very much in train. I have also given the Housing Agency the lead role in establishing a national framework for housing supply, with an annual national statement of projected housing supply and demand to be published every June. And I think that is essential, that we have real-time data feeding into government policy and to inform policy decisions. Government needs high-quality information and projections to inform future housing and construction policy, and the construction industry needs to be building the type of properties that changing demographics demand. Any measure to bring greater stability and certainty to the housing market is important and very welcome, but also needs to be framed by an overarching strategy. Accordingly, and in line with Action 8 of the Construction 2020 strategy, a social housing strategy is to be published setting out a vision for this sector. This major work item is well underway in my department. We cannot simply continue to do business the way we have been, as it is not producing an adequate supply of housing for those who really need it. The proper management of all state land is critical. Accordingly, both lands that have been transferred to the Housing Agency and local authority held lands suitable for development will be the first sites considered in any future targeted social housing building programme. The most recent assessment of the housing need, which was carried out in 2013, shows a continuing high demand for social housing supports. Just under 90,000 households are classified as being in need of social housing supports, and while this represents a reduction of 9% on the 2011 assessment, it is significantly above the 2008 figure of 56,249, and it needs to be tackled as a matter of urgency. The challenge is, therefore, to meet social housing need in an innovative and cost-effective manner. This will require support and coordinated action from a number of key parties, including local authorities, approved housing bodies, the rental sector, NAMA, central government, and of course yourselves in the CIF and those in the private industry. You have a pivotal role to play in ensuring the successful delivery of additional housing units and construction projects. The delivery of new build is required and needs to be initiated as soon as possible. Exchequer funding is the subject of priority discussions at the moment and in the context of the 2015 budgetary process. But I do expect some initiatives to be announced in that budget, especially in the areas of capital projects and indeed other innovative initiatives as well. Based on an analysis of the housing needs assessment, the Housing Agency estimates some 35,000 additional residential properties will be required over the next 5 years to meet the needs of households qualified for social housing support, the majority of which will need to be constructed. A combination of exchequer and non-exchequer financing, utilising both local authority and approved housing body-led programmes, will be needed to supply these units. The Construction 2020 target of tripling annual housing output over the next 6 years further informs the scale of the challenge that we all share. Beyond our immediate supply difficulties, the social housing strategy will propose a funding structure capable of delivering these numbers of social units in a programmed way. This will give surety and confidence to potential investors and will provide significant scale to the social housing programme into the future. In order to ensure that short-term supply is maximised, in tandem with the new build programme, the strategy will include a range of actions to increase supply, including the maximisation of the existing social housing stock through refurbishment and retrofit programmes. The strategy is being developed with the involvement of the Housing Agency and the National Economic and Social Council, following a full public consultation process. The government does not have a monopoly on solutions, and that is why the housing agencies, indeed people like yourself, offering submissions from stakeholders to assist in the development of the construction strategy and the social housing strategy. Submissions received have been examined and are being considered as part of the drafting process. Officials in my department have also met with all stakeholders, including the CIF, in the social housing arena over the past number of months. Minister Alan Kelly and I intend that the social housing strategy will be both challenging and innovative, and will provide the basis for an enhanced approach to social housing provision in Ireland. Its short-term focus will necessarily be on addressing the immediate, acute social housing supply issues, but it will also identify the main structural, policy and financing issues that need to be addressed over the course of the strategy. The Part 5 area was mentioned by your President as well, and Construction 2020 also includes an action requiring the completion of the review of Part 5 of the Planning and Development Acts, which deals with affordable housing and with social housing gain from private development. I am happy to confirm that the review has now been completed, and that I anticipate that any legislative changes required on foot of the review will be incorporated into the general scheme of a planning bill, which is currently in preparation as we speak. As the extent of social housing gain from Part 5 is directly related to private housing construction, the current situation is that there is very limited Part 5 delivery in terms of social housing. I am committed to the principle of a social housing gain from private development, but I recognise that to maximise that gain, we need a properly functioning, viable and sustainable construction sector. I believe that the Part 5 mechanism has the potential to again be a significant contributor to social housing in the context of a recovering housing market. While the government will not facilitate the return of any boom-bust cycle, such as the one that has inflicted so much damage on our economy and on our society, and ultimately on the construction industry itself, the pendulum has swung too far in the opposite direction. Particularly in key urban areas, we are simply not building enough homes, private homes or social homes, to meet demand that's out there. We need to match the supply with demand and to build accommodation appropriate for the households and the new unfolding demographic. We all want to see the construction sector back on its feet, but the sector must produce affordable and sustainable housing in appropriate locations to suit the needs of households. A number of the 2020 actions are also in train to enhance the building and regulatory framework and also the energy efficiency performance area. I am pleased to see that the Building Control Regulations 2014 are now working effectively in practice. Happily, over 3,000 construction projects have commenced since the new building regulations came into operation on the 1st of March 2014. The new regulations empower competence and professionalism in building and design, and also require greater accountability in relation to compliance with the building regulations. I also welcome the evidence to date that suggests that the construction industry is responding well to the new challenges that have presented, just as local authorities across the state are strengthening their capacity to monitor construction activity. Knowledge and oversight of activity has improved substantially, as authorities have now ready access to detailed data on projects via the online building control management system. The online system streamlines building control administration and enables authorities to identify risks and track progress. A framework for building control authorities was adopted by the City and County Management Association on the 17th of July 2014. These common protocols will add clarity, efficiency and consistency to building control activities across the local government sector. And I am satisfied that the new regulatory framework represents a reasonable and appropriate response to the many building failures that occurred in the past decade, and I am confident that it will usher in a new era of quality in our construction industry. Consumers have every right to expect the buildings they buy or the professional services they pay for comply fully with statutory requirements, and the government must and will stand firm on this. I have no doubt that builders take pride in their work, and I urge that no shortcuts will be taken anymore. What looks good to the untrained eye is no quality mark, and I think we all know that. The regulatory framework has been enhanced, and the construction industry must continue to step up to the mark. I also must give credit where credit is due, and I am pleased to acknowledge that the industry is engaging with the Voluntary Construction Industry Register of Ireland, which is now up and running. The government is committed to placing this register on a statutory footing by 2015, and I've listened strongly to the calls by your President in that regard. The register is in everyone's interest. It will enable consumers to ensure that they hire competent builders and contractors while simultaneously ensuring that all statutory, regulatory and legal requirements are complied with in a verifiable and transparent manner. Registration will bring with it a competitive advantage. A home buyer would naturally take cognizance of the register in their decision to buy a particular home, and the same logic would apply in commercial development transactions. CIRI is a key priority for government, and I look forward to continued strong engagement with the sector in order to deliver a robust quality registration system that serves the needs and expectations of consumers, of professionals engaged by consumers, and of competent construction practitioners. Any owner or professional or builder who faced up to their responsibilities in the past has nothing to fear from these new arrangements, whilst those who do not meet their statutory obligations should, of course, I think you will agree, be held to account. Funding for housing in 2014 by my department is at over €647 million, which exceeds 2013 levels. This represents almost 70% of the budget for my department. The department expects that the final output across all social housing programme for 2014 will be in the region of 6,000 new housing units. And these units will be delivered through a range of measures, as I've already outlined. Now, just to talk a bit about the voids and the vacant houses that exist. There are two important strands to the government's social housing investment programme. Firstly, to increase the supply of social homes, and secondly, to ensure that every available unit that exists is transformed into a home. With supply at record low levels, the second strand, turning empty units into family homes, is of a high importance in addressing the immediate problem of supply, particularly for social housing, and through funding being provided by this government, over 1,900 void local authority units are to be brought back into the supply chain this year and next year. This represents one of the quickest and most cost-effective ways of increasing the social housing stock, and it also has positive impacts in terms of local employment opportunities and improved neighbourhoods. Given that the scope for Exchequer-funded large-scale capital building programmes has been limited and is still limited, the not-for-profit housing sector must play a key role in the delivery of social housing. Greater use must be made of the skills and expertise of the approved housing bodies sector. In particular, the capacity of the sector to attract additional external financial investment without impacting on government debt levels will be extremely important. The sector is actively engaging with my department in exploring new ventures for this area, which I hope to see progress during this year. Also, energy efficiency and insulation and the retrofitting programme is very important. A €50 million job stimulus fund is available for the 2013 to 2015 energy efficiency, insulation and retrofitting programme. This funding will ensure that the entire social housing stock will have, at a minimum, cavity wall insulation, roof insulation and draft proofing. The programme will target the 25,000 least energy efficient local authority homes and provide warmer homes and lower energy bills for thousands of families. The programme is expected to create around 1,000 jobs in the construction area. Another very topical issue, and quite rightly so, is homelessness. Social inclusion is central to the government's clear commitment to tackling homelessness, outlined in the government's homelessness policy statement, which was published in January 2015. Our aim is to end long-term homelessness by the end of 2016. The statement emphasises a housing-led approach which is about accessing permanent housing as the primary response to all forms of homelessness. The availability and supply of secure, affordable and adequate housing units is essential in ensuring sustainable tenancies and ending long-term homelessness. In May, the government approved the implementation plan on the state's response to homelessness, which outlines how the state can achieve the objective of ending long-term homelessness. I was very pleased that there was full support amongst Cabinet colleagues for this plan. Implementing this plan requires a whole-of-government approach to addressing this important issue. I expect that the approaches outlined in the implementation plan will deliver up to 2,700 units within the period to the end of 2016. In May of this year, an additional €46 million for the social housing programme was announced, and this will help increase housing supply, targeted at people specifically with a disability, and also people who are homeless and those that are elderly. In conclusion, I hope that I have illustrated to you for you this morning the government's resolve in seeking to urgently increasing housing supply and to get the construction sector back to a sustainable level. The construction sector needs and is getting our help, but the government needs your help also. However, I would caution that the quality and choice of accommodation must not be overlooked in the effort to increase housing supply. Although we must resolve the immediate housing difficulties facing many people, we must also avoid making ill-judged policy decisions for the short-term expediency that ultimately give rise to negative outcomes in the longer term. We must learn from past mistakes. We must develop housing policy on a firm evidence base that will deliver positive, sustainable outcomes in the longer term for individual households and the state itself, and indeed for the sector itself also. The Government's 2011 Housing Policy Statement outlines that the priority for Government is to meet the most acute needs for households applying for social housing support, and that must continue to be the case. As Minister, I cannot and will not relent in delivering on this objective, and I hope that the builders and indeed yourselves can roll up your sleeves and help us deliver on these objectives. I will leave it to the Taoiseach, who later on is giving her keynote express, to outline further priorities in Government and the issues that she sees as her priority in creating jobs in the construction sector. I do expect, as I said, some announcements of a positive nature in the forthcoming budget to stimulate construction and stimulate further growth in our economy. As the recovery takes hold, it is essential that we learn from mistakes of the past. It is also essential, as I said, the construction sector has been underperforming over the past few years. And, you know, we have to, I suppose, be open and honest and admit the construction sector, developers, builders, got a bad name over the last number of years. But I believe there is an important role for the construction sector and indeed builders to contribute to any normal society in regards to economic growth and economic sustainability. And, you know, I look forward to working with that sector to ensure that that is the case. So I also note that there are some very interesting debates happening at your conference here today. I won't be able to stay all day, but I certainly will be reading up on the briefs from those reports, and I will be listening intently. So I want to wish you and the CIF and your members the very best for the rest of this day, but also wish you well as you look forward to meeting the challenges that are ahead. And there are challenges ahead. But I always believe where there are challenges, there are also opportunities. And, you know, our country has moved from the stability phase as we now move to the recovery and growth phase. And I think we all have a proactive and important role to play in that. So I want to wish you all very well in that role. Thank you all very much.